Hi, and welcome back to uncoverfraud.com. My name is David Malamed, and I am a forensic accountant and fraud investigation expert. Today I'm going to be talking to you about functions that you can use in Microsoft Excel. So if you're an accountant, if you're in data, if you're in finance, or you've just got a general interest in Microsoft Excel and how to use the functions and really get the most out of it to be effective and efficient, you're going to want to watch this video. Now, before I flip over the screen, I just want to thank you again for tuning in. For those of you who haven't yet subscribed, please subscribe below. As well, if you find value in this video, please like it and leave me some feedback as well. So let's flip over to the screen and let's look at Excel and let's look at those functions. Now, the first function that I'm going to start off with is aggregate. And aggregate really is a total. But the basic formula for a total is usually equals sum, open bracket, and then what I would do is I would highlight the area that I'm trying to get the total of. And you'll see that the total is $154,345.13. Now, if I do the same thing with aggregate, I type in aggregate, I open, and what I was looking for was the sum, so that's number 9. And I'm going to push a comma. And then I'm going to look at the ignore hidden rows and error values. Now, I don't have any hidden rows right now, and I don't have any error values, but I'm going to show you both of those. So I'm going to just click on number 7. And then I'm going to do the array. So I'm going to do the full area that I would be totaling up. And when I look there, I see it's the same as if I would have used sum. But the difference happens now when we start to do some filtering. So if I pull my filter down and I only want to look at Loblaws, you'll see that the sum formula didn't change at all. But the aggregate formula now ignores the hidden cells and only gives you the total of these 4 cells over here. Now I'm going to go back. And I'm going to show you this example over here. And I'll just hide these lines here for you guys. So now I'm going to give you another example of how you would use aggregate and why you want to use it. So when I look over here, I've got sales, sales of equipment, other revenue. And you'll see that I've used aggregate, and I'm going to do it again. So I'm going to do equals aggregate, open bracket. I'm looking for the sum, and I'm looking for ignore nested subtotal and aggregate functions. So if there's an aggregate somewhere in what it is that I'm working on, it's going to ignore it. So I'm going to push the 0. And then I'm going to highlight the areas that I want totaled. Then I'm going to do the same thing over here. And I will redo that 65977 just so you can see equals aggregate, open bracket. I'm doing the sum, that's number 9. I'm putting a comma in, and I'm choosing 0. And I'm going to highlight the area that I want totaled. And we've got the 65977 there. Now, when we go to profit before tax, we would do equals aggregate, open bracket. We're going to do the sum that we're looking for. And we are going to, as I said, ignore nested subtotal and aggregate functions. And we're going to highlight the full area over here. And we're going to push enter. And we get 122,421. If we would have taken the 188, and we would have taken the negative 65,000, and we would have added the 2, you would see that we get 122,421. But what we've done is we've got the 122,421 in here by skipping that step and ensuring that we've captured all the lines of data. So that's aggregate. Now let's move to round. You know, when you multiply a whole number by a percentage, usually you get a decimal, but that decimal is not necessarily 2 places. It could be 3 places, 4 places, 5 places, and so on. So in this example on screen, you'll see that the sales is $231,000. The commission rate for the salesperson is 13.76%. When we multiply the two, so we would take the sales, we would multiply it by open bracket 1 plus the 13.76. We get 0.9280. But really, we've got to get it to 0.93. So we're going to do our equals round, open bracket. We're going to click on the number that we're trying to round. We're going to put in 2 digits, meaning we want it to round to 0.93, so 2 digits after the decimal place, and we're going to close the bracket. And we see that it has gone to that 0.93. Now at times you're going to want a whole number. You're going to not want to see the change, but you're actually going to want to see it rounded to 962 and no change, depending on the work that you're doing. So again, we would equal round, open bracket. We're going to choose this number as the one we want to round. And instead of putting in 2 decimal spaces, we're going to put in 0. And you see that now we have the 262, 962. So if we want to round to the closest 10, we're going to have to not go 0, but we're going to have to go the negatives, and the negatives means that it goes to the left of the decimal place. So if we want to round to the closest 10, we're going to do equals round, open bracket, take our number again, comma, and -1, close bracket. And we see that it goes up to 960, or it gets rounded down to 960. If we wanted to go to the closest 100, we would do again equals round, and we're going to click on the number we want, we're going to comma, and we're going to -2, and you'll see that it's now gone to even $263,000. Now, round is going to be very useful to you depending on, as I said, the analytics that you're doing and the things that you're looking at. Sometimes the detail, the specific numbers are not things that you want to see, but you want to see the bigger picture. So next I want to talk to you about the end of the month date. A lot of the time you need to know the end of the month because you're doing a calculation on accounts receivable, accounts payable, potentially you're looking at aged receivables or aged payables. So you really want to know what the end of the month is. The way to know the end of the month is to use the function equals EO month. We're going to open the bracket. We're going to tap the month that we are looking at, or the line item when we see that's January 2nd, 2021. And we're going to type in a 0. And we see a number here. What we want to do is we want to format our number to date. And we're looking for the short date right there. And we see that the end of the month for the transaction that happened on January 2nd, 2021 is January 31st, 2021. And you can just double click and move it all the way down there. So you'll be able to see the end of the month for all of the months and the transactions that you have. Let's say though, that you wanted to see the end of not this month, but the next month. You would again do your EO month, open bracket. You will click on the date that you're trying to roll forward. And now instead of a 0, we're actually going to say the next month, which is a 1. We see that we need to format. So we go back to our format cells. We go back to date. We choose the short date and we drop it down. And you'll be able to see that that is now the end of the next month. You're going to see this as a very helpful tool with aging. And as I said, with payments that are due and with payments that are being received. E-date. Sometimes what's important is not necessarily knowing what the end of the month is, but you really want to know what 15 months from the specific date is. And that's when we use E-date. So we would equal E-date, we would open the bracket, we would take the transaction date, we put a comma in, and we're looking for 15 months down the road. And if we double click, we can just make it scroll all the way down, and now you're able to see 15 months down the road. This again is very important, most likely for your data analytics that you're looking at. Now, next is going to be workday. A lot of the time you need to know, from a certain period of time, a certain date, how many business days will occur between X period and X period. So I'm using 7 business days as an example. When we're looking at business days, we would say equals workday, and there's actually a more advanced workday, so I would choose Workday International, and I'll show you why in a second. And what I'm looking for is the start date, so what's in my A2 cell, and I want 7 days from there, and I want them to know that the weekend, well, I'm going to use the North American weekend of Saturday and Sunday. And in terms of holidays, are there any public holidays? I've made a list of public holidays over here. So we're just going to keep those, and we can always push F4, and you'll see those dollar signs, and those dollar signs mean that it won't change at all, that section. It will keep those highlighted areas consistent when we drop it down for our formula, and we're going to close the bracket. And we see that from the 2nd of January, 7 business days is the 11th. And let's count. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, taking us to January 11th. And when we look at the public holidays, we'll see that there are no public holidays that actually fall between January 2nd and January 11th. And then what I'm doing is I'm just going to the bottom right of the cell, I'm clicking twice, and that will pull it down. And you'll be able to see 7 business days from each of the transaction dates forward. And you can check them, and you can check them against your public holidays. 3D formula. The 3D formula is used when you've got multiple pages that you're looking at getting a total sum of those line items from the multiple pages. It used to be that you would start off with your equal sum, and you would go to your first worksheet and you would highlight the areas that you want summed up. You would close the bracket, you would do plus sum, open the bracket, you would go to the next page, you would highlight again the rows, and you would close bracket, and you would add again with a plus, and you'd do sum and open a bracket, and where you go to material, and where you take these 3 lines and we close the bracket, we hit enter, and we get the 245,954. So that was a long process, something that I can just show you again. If you hit F2, you'd actually be able to see the formula. So F2 is a shortcut key. And I can see how many sums that I've got there, and just think that if you had multiple pages, what you would do and how you would do it. So if we use the 3D sum formula, before we do it, we've got to look at which of our spreadsheets has the longest number of transactions. And that's this one over here. So I see that it's got 11 lines of transactions, and I can even count the top if I want. My 3D formula is going to be equals sum, and I'm going to open my bracket, and I'm going to go to my first worksheet. And remember we said there's 12, so I'm going to go down to number 12. You'll see that in small on the right side. And then here's the important part. You want to hold your shift key. You want to go to your last page, which is the materials. And you want to push close bracket. And now, when we go to the 3D sum formula, you will see pretty quickly that we've got the same 245,954. Now, something else that's interesting about this is right now I've got cost of goods sold, lease, and material combined. But if I wanted to, I've also made a non-operating expense sheet. I can take that non-operating expense sheet and move it over in between cost of goods sold and material. And when I go to the 3D formula, I see that my non-operating expense has actually made its way into my calculation, whereas if you would have used the standard sum formula, you would have seen that it would have stayed at 245, 954, 32, and you'd be missing an entire page of data. Let's look at the if formula. The if formula really puts on the criteria of if something has occurred, then I want to see this. If it hasn't occurred, then I want to see that. So over here where I've got validate, I'm going to say that equals if, open bracket, if this number here is greater than, say, $10,000, then I want to put in a word, and you need to use quotes for that, validated. If not, that's the comma. So this now means if it's not greater than $10,000, I'm going to put in 2 quotes, and that means just leave it blank. And I'm going to close my bracket. And now I'm going to copy that all the way to the bottom. And you'll see that the ones that are greater than $10,000 now have validated, and the ones that are not greater than $10,000 are blanks. So really very helpful in terms of potentially looking at if there is a ceiling with a specific vendor that you're using and you want to pop that out, if potentially you've given too much credit to somebody, and there are so many other applications for the if, but really the if statement is, if this occurred, then I want to see that, and if something else occurred, then show me this. And that really is what's happening on this page. The next thing we're going to be doing is using one of the most important tools, and that's a V-lookup. A V-lookup really is a vertical lookup. There's also H-lookup, a horizontal lookup, but I'm going to show you the vertical lookup. Now, when I do the lookup, the V-lookup, I start off with V-lookup. And what I'm looking for when I open my bracket is I can see that I've got the account number in the chart of accounts, but I don't have the description here. So I'm going to say, look for this account number in this table, and I'm going to hit F4, so I lock the table, and show me in that table that if that 1001 is there, show me the second column of it, which should be bank. Then if I drop down again and I pull them all down, you will see that what it's done is it's pulled for you by looking up 1002, it sees 1002 over here, it takes the accounts receivable, and it puts it over here. If by any chance it had a blank to it, and let's just say that loan didn't exist, you would see an error right here, and you'd see that there's something wrong. I'm just going to put loan back there, and you see that it comes right back. Okay, that's the V-lookup, and the H-lookup is just looking horizontally down, so you could do that yourselves. The last function I'm going to be talking to you about is pivot tables. And pivot tables really let you analyze your data and move things around, manipulate them to get an idea of what has occurred. So first, we've got to learn how to make the pivot table. We're going to highlight all the data that we have, and remember that when you're making a pivot table, you need to have labels for each of your columns. You can't have a column like amount where there's something blank here, or the pivot table won't work. So let's just put that back. So I've highlighted my 4 columns. I'm going to put where the letter G is here. That's where I want my pivot table to come. So then I'm going to highlight everything. I'm going to insert my pivot table. I'm going to put it onto an existing worksheet. Location, I'm going to put it right there. And I'm going to hit OK. And here is my pivot table. And it looks pretty empty, that I don't know necessarily what it is that I'm going to do with it. Now, we've got to start populating the data into the pivot table to really see the power of it. First, I'm going to take the account, and I'm going to pull the account down to rows. And you'll see that I've got Loblaws, no frills, and Sobeys. I'm going to get rid of that blank because there's no need for that blank for you to see that. And when I look at no frills, Loblaws, and Sobeys, I may want to know what the total amount is of each of them. So what I can do is I can go to my sum, I can go to my number, I can use 2 decimal places and hit OK. And I see that the totals for each of those suppliers. Now, I also may want to see how many transactions there were with each of the suppliers. So now I can take the account and I can put it right where the values are, and it goes to count, but I'm going to do that anyway. So I go to value field settings and I go to count and I go to number format, and it's a number, but I'm making sure that there's no decimal places, and I hit OK, and I hit OK. And now you'll see that there are 4 lines that have Loblaws, 6 lines that have no frills, and 6 lines that have Sobeys. So you can start to see how the application is really very helpful. Just imagine if you had rent checks and you used the pivot table, you'd be able to count how many rent checks you have. You'd be able to see the total of the rent checks, and you'd probably know the monthly rent. If you saw that there were 14 rent checks paid within a 12-month period, you likely have a problem. And that's something that you're going to have to dive in and see what the problem is. Is it just a data entry issue? Or potentially, is there some type of fraud that's occurring or misrepresentation because 14 rent payments were made versus the 12 that you would expect? So that really is the Microsoft Excel functions that I've got for you today. And hopefully you found them really helpful. If you did, please don't forget to subscribe and like my channel below. Also, set the bell so you can see whenever new videos come out. Excel really is one of the most helpful tools that I have in my arsenal.